Today I have another response to a request that we've received on our website, and this is to take the inputs for an indicator from a file. So the technique is the same for an indicator or an expert, but I'll be demonstrating this for an indicator today. You may want to do this because you're getting the inputs from some other source that's writing data to a file, or it might be that you're running an expert advisor on a VPS and you don't want to actually log into the VPS and modify directly on screen. You want to change the inputs remotely through something like a file on Google Drive. This video is for MetaTrader 5. There is a separate video for MetaTrader 4, and I will leave a link in the description and on screen to the MetaTrader 4 video. For this video, I'm going to be using a very simple indicator, a Donchian channel. I'm using the Donchian channel because it involves no technical indicators. It's simply the high and low of recent bars. First, I'll write the Donchian indicator, and then I'll modify that to take the inputs from a file and explain some of the things you need to consider in making that change. Now I have MetaTrader 5 open here. I'm just going to click the IDE button to open up the editor. And now under indicators, I have an Orchard folder that I always have there. I'm going to create a folder in here for the Donchian Channel Indicator. And now I'm going to right click here, select new file, custom indicator, next. Call that Donchian channel. Next. I'm going to add the two levels. So Donchian has a high and a low. I call that high, it's type 1. I'm going to make this white for the high. And I'll make it blue for the lower line. And then finish. Alright, so that's created most of what I need. I'll just separate this out a little bit. So indicator buffers 2, I have two sets of values. They'll be the values for the high and for the low line. And indicator plots says that I'm going to putting both of those on the screen. I've got two plots, the high and the low line on the screen. I'm going to change this style solid to a dot. I'll do that for both. And so the wizard has put this in here. The label for number 1 is high, the type is a line, color is white, style is a dot, and it's width 1. And then the low line, also low, draw line, color blue, style dot 1. The wizard has also created these two double arrays, high buffer and low buffer, and they will store the values that go into that high and low part of the indicator. And then the wizard has also inserted these lines, set index buffer, number 0, high buffer, indicator underscore data. So what that does is allocate the high buffer to index number 0, and it will be matched automatically then by the software. And that means that every time a new bar is created or a bar is deleted from the screen, the high buffer will be adjusted to match the bars on screen. And the same for low buffer, but this is index number 1. And then the wizard has also inserted this onCalculate function, but there's no body in here at the moment. The Donchian channel has a single input, and that's number of bars, because Donchian is simply the highest high and the lowest low within a given number of bars. So I just need to know how many bars. I'm defaulting that to 10. So input int INP Donchian bars equals 10. And now I'm going to make another adjustment here. This high buffer and low buffer, I want to set those arrays as series, and that way index number 0 from each of these buffers will match up with bar number 0 on screen. If not, then index number 0 would be whatever the leftmost bar is on screen, or rather even off screen. It would be the leftmost bar in the data array. So I want to reverse that, and that way I can refer to these with the same numbers that I use to refer to the bar numbers on screen. And that's the simple statement, array set as series, high buffer, comma, true, and array set as series, low buffer, comma, true. So I'm saying both of those are series arrays. And now in the onCalculate, I need to know how many bars I'm going to calculate. When I first load this indicator, there is no Donchian channel already drawn on the screen. So I'm going to have to calculate that from the very beginning of the number of bars available up to now. After that, I'm only going to want to recalculate things that have changed. So I'm declaring a variable count, int count, and that's the number of bars that I'm going to be calculating. And that is equal to rates total minus prev calculated. So rates total and prev calculated are both passed into this function. On the first call to the function, prev calculated is 0. Each call after that, prev calculated will have the same value that was returned here, which by default is returning rates total. And rates total, each time this is called, has the total number of bars that are available. So if a new bar is created, rates total will go up by 1, and unless we've dropped some bars off because we've reached our maximum limit, prev calculated will be whatever rates total was the call before that. So I'm initializing count to rates total minus prev calculated, and that tells me how many bars I need to calculate. Obviously on the first call through this, prev calculated is 0, rates total is not, so that means I'm setting count to the total number of rates. But then I have this test if prev calculated is greater than 0. So remember, it's 0 the first time this function is called. If it's greater than 0, then I must have called this function and returned a value already. And so I simply increment count by 1, count plus plus. That means that I'm going to recalculate the last bar that was calculated. So just in case that value changed in between the last call to this function and this, I'm going to recalculate that bar, and that forces me to recalculate the currently changing bars. And then this one more statement, if count is greater than rates total minus INP Donchian bars, I want to make sure I have enough bars to calculate. So I'm not going to be going all the way back to the very first bar. I can start at INP Donchian bars because I have to look back by that many bars. So if count is greater than that, then I simply say count equals rates total minus INP Donchian bars. And so that sets the count to the minimum number that I need to calculate. And then I just need to loop through for this number of count and recalculate the high and the low buffer for each of those. So I have a simple loop here for int I equals count minus 1, because the array is 0 based and count is the actual number of bars. So for I equals count minus 1, while I is greater than or equal to 0, I minus minus, counting from the high number down to the low number. And I simply assign to high buffer I, let me scroll to the right a little. First thing, this I highest function. The arguments to that I highest symbol with the bracket bracket is the current chart symbol. Period bracket bracket is the current chart time frame. Mode high means I'm looking at the high price. INP Donchian bars is the number of bars that I'm looking at. And I is the start bar. I highest will simply tell me the bar number that has the highest high value in this number of bars beginning at position I. And I highest returns an absolute bar number. It's not relative to this starting position. So once I get that, I can then use that value in the function I high, which actually gives me the value. So I highest just gives me the bar number. I high gives me the value of the high price for the same symbol and period and for that bar. The low buffer, same treatment, but here I use the I low function to get the low price for the symbol and period, and I lowest with the argument mode low gives me the bar that has the lowest low price in that range. So once these values are assigned to high buffer and low buffer, that's all I need to do to draw that line on screen. And then I return rates total so that next time I come through here, count will only be as many bars as I need to recalculate. So that's the basic Donchian channel indicator. with no adjustments for reading from a file. I'll just compile this and then see that work on screen. Now back on screen I have Orchard, Donchian Channel. Here's the Donchian Channel Indicator. I'll drag that on. The input, the default input is 10. And so I have here a line that tracks the highest high for the last 10 bars and a line that tracks the lowest low for the last 10 bars. If I just change that to something like 30, you can see the lines changing. And now back in the editor, here under Files, Orchard, I've created this file called donchianinputs.ini. I've got it open here. And I have three values in here. Donchian bars, which matches the input that we have already in the indicator. But then I've added high label and low label. And I've just set those at the moment to high and low. I've created these three because Donchian bars matches one of the inputs, so that's something you may want to modify. But to also show the other options here, high label and low label don't have matching inputs. So it just shows you can add other values. And now the first thing that you need to consider, and this is quite important, is what happens where you have an input and you also have a value in the file. This input is going to be remembered each time you restart the indicator or the expert, and the file is also there with possibly a different value. So you need to make a decision on which of those is going to be the value used. Now there's no magical global answer for this, you just need to decide that, so it's just something you need to consider. I'm going to take an approach that I'm going to have an input here for a file name. If the file name is specified, then any values in that file will override any of these inputs. And if the value doesn't exist in the file, or if there is no file name specified, then these inputs are going to be used. And so I've just got an input string INP settings file, Orchard donchianinputs.ini. MetaTrader file access functions can only read and write files that are inside this files folder. If you wanted to read and write files outside that, you would have to use something like the Windows APIs. I'm not going to do that, so I'm making sure this file is within this files folder. Now also, because I might be loading the value of Donchian bars from the file, I can't simply use this INP Donchian bars throughout the code because I can't change the value of that input variable. So I'm going to create a second variable just called Donchian bars to hold the actual working value. And now that I have that, I need to change any use of INP Donchian bars in the code to just Donchian bars. So it's found this value down here. And now, of course, I need to put a value into Donchian bars. So here in the onInit function, I simply say Donchian bars equals INP Donchian bars. So that will begin with whatever was the input value. Each time this indicator is loaded, any value that you set in that input previously will be reloaded, even if it's not the same as the value that was used from the file. And now down in the onCalculate function, I'm going to read the values from that file, and I'm going to write a single function for that. So here I'm just going to insert a call to that function. Now I'm going to be calling the function loadFile, and it's going to return a Boolean if any of the values have been loaded that affect the way the indicator is calculated. So if we go back to the Donchian inputs here, Donchian bars will obviously affect the way the indicator is calculated if I change that. But if I change the label, I don't need to recalculate anything, just change the labels. So this load file will be returning true or false depending whether I need to recalculate everything. If it returns true, then I'm just going to set count equal to rates total. That should be rates total minus Donchian bars. And that will cause everything to be recalculated. If it returns false, then count will just be whatever it was set to in these lines above. Now also, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, because INP Donchian bars comes in here with the same input value that was set the last time you ran this, regardless of whether you've changed it through the file or not, I need to make sure that I overwrite this Donchian bars now with anything that's in the file. So I'm just making a single call to load file there. I don't care at this point if it returns true or false because I haven't calculated anything on screen, so I know that's all going to be calculated the first time. But I just want to make sure I load the file once. And those are all the changes I need to make in the main body. Now I just need to write this load file function so that I can load those values. Now I said this is a Boolean, and so I'm setting up a variable that I'm just calling result, Boolean result, and initializing that to false, which means that unless I change this, there is no need to recalculate the indicator. The first statement here, if INP settings file, that should be equals, if INP settings file is equal to an empty string, return result. So if you, let me go back up here to the inputs. If this input is an empty string, then it means there is no file that you want to read, and so this will simply return and won't waste time trying to read files that don't exist. Also, just in case you got this value incorrect and it can't find that file, I have this statement, if not file is exist, INP settings file, then return result. And at this stage, result is just false. I could have simply put false here, but I'm just using result. So if the file doesn't exist, or if the settings file is an empty string, then I just return false and no more processing in this load file function. Now, I don't want to read this file and go through the trouble of processing it every time this is called. So if we go back here, I have this load file function on every iteration of the onCalculate function. You may prefer to only run this when there's a new bar, and you can put conditions around this to only call load file on a new bar. But I'm choosing at the moment to call it on every iteration. I don't want to go through a lot of processing if nothing's changed in the file, so I'm going to test the modified date on the file. So I start out with a variable last mod date. So this will store the last modified date that I knew for that file. And this is a static. So static long last mod date. The static means that last mod date on the first call to this function will be initialized to 0. But on each call to load file after that, last mod date will have the same value that it had when we exited this function the time before. So that's how I'm able to remember the last modified date that I knew for this file. And then it's just long mod date equals file get integer, INP settings file, file modified date. Okay, so that gets the date and time that the file was modified. And then I can compare these two. If mod date is equal to last mod date, it means the file hasn't changed, and I just return result. And if it has changed, then I set last mod date to mod date so it's ready for the next time through here. And now I need some working values. All values in the ini file are going to be read initially as strings, and they come in two parts, a key equals value. So I'm declaring a key and a string value, initializing those two empty strings. Line will be used to contain the entire line that I read in, and then when I parse that line, splitting it on that equals sign, it will go into this parts array. And now I need to open the file. So the statement is file open, passing in the file name, INP settings file, and the flags are file share read, or file text, or file ANSI. And these are a single vertical line OR, not the double vertical line, so it's not a condition. This is actually creating a logical OR of these values, so it creates a single value flag. I'm opening it for read in shared mode, it's a text file, and it's an ANSI file. If this fails for some reason, then handle will be equal to invalid handle. So if handle is equal to invalid handle, return result, which will simply return from here. You may want here to put some kind of error message and print that in the log. You may want to do the same thing here if the invalid file name has been specified. I'm at the moment choosing to simply return and ignore that. And then I have this file seek. that will move the pointer in the file. Now, when the file's first opened, I should be pointing at the beginning. I'm just being safe by doing this. File seek, handle to the file, position 0, seek underscore set. So seek underscore set tells me that I want to go to an absolute position in the file. There are other values here that will set relative locations compared to either the current position in the file or the end of the file. But seek set and 0 will move to the very beginning of the file. And now I need to read each line of that file and process each line. So a simple while loop, while not file is ending, handle, tells me if I'm at the end of the file. So while that's not true, it means I'm not at the end of the file. Then I assign line with file read string for handle, and that reads an entire line up to the carriage return line feed terminator. I'm calling string split on line, passing in the equal sign, and this has single quotation marks around it, not the double quotation mark. This argument in string split is a char, not a string. Single quotation marks around a single character will give me a char value. If I use double quotation marks, that would give me the equal sign as a string, and that wouldn't work for the string split function. So line, parsing on an equal sign, and that puts the result into this parts array. I'm initializing key and s value to empty strings because they would have been whatever was set in the last iteration through this. I'm getting the size equals array size of parts. Now at this point you could simply put a statement that if the size is less than 2, then it means you have an invalid line from the Donchian inputs file. I haven't done that. I've set individual tests for each one. So if size is greater than 0, then I can assign the key, and if size is greater than 1, then I can assign the s value to parts 0 or parts 1. And then I don't want to be restricted in terms of what goes into this Donchian inputs, so I'm going to convert that key to lowercase. So it doesn't matter if you capitalize this correctly or not, as long as you have the right characters in the right sequence. String to lower, I'm setting that to a lowercase value. And then I need to evaluate what to do with those. I can't use a switch statement because the key is a string, and switch statement won't work for a string. So I'm using if statements. So if key is equal to Donchian bars, and because I've set the key to lowercase, I need to make sure that all of these are lowercase. So if it's equal to Donchian bars, else if key is equal to high label, else if key is equal to low label. High label and low label are simple. I simply call plot index set string for the buffer number, 0 for the high and 1 for the low. I'm setting the plot label to the string value. So that simply reassigns a name to each of those buffers. But the Donchian bars is a little different, and that's why I've had these 3 in here so I can show a different handling. For Donchian bars, I want to know if it changes, and if it does, then I want to recalculate the entire indicator. To make that easier, I've got another function that I'll write in a moment called set value. It will return true if this value on the left is not the same as this value on the right, and it will take care of assigning this value on the right into this variable on the left. So I'm simply saying set value, current value for Donchian bars, new value for Donchian bars. If they happen to be the same, this will return false, and if they're different, it will update Donchian bars and return true. I have here result or equals set value. Or equals is the same as saying result equals result or set value, which means that the first time set value returns true, result will be true, and it will stay true until I finish the function. And that way this function will return true, which will, let me scroll back up, which will trigger this statement and cause the entire indicator to be recalculated. And so you can see I've only done that for the Donchian bars because I don't need to recalculate the indicator for the high or the low label. And then this while loop will continue until I get to file is ending. And after that, I just need to call file close for that handle and then return the result. So now let's look at the set value function. Now in this example, I only have an integer. The Donchian bars is an integer. I don't have anything else that I'm setting in the file. But I wanted to make this set value function so it would work with other types of variables. So maybe doubles or date times or booleans. So I've used the statement here, template, left angle bracket, type name t, right angle bracket. So that creates this placeholder t. And you can see I've used the placeholder t here and here. And because the values I'm passing in from this call are both integers, that will set t to an integer. And so I can call this function with different types of variables, and this t will be replaced with the variable type. So in this case, it will be the same as saying set value int current value int new value. If I called it with a date time, it would be the same as saying set value date time current value date time new value. And you can see I've also got an ampersand here on the current value. That means I'm passing it by reference. So I can set the value of that inside this function, and that new value will return to the call. So then I need to do the comparison. If current value is not equal to new value, that means I do have to set it. So I just do set current value equals new value, and then return true, because that means I've made a change. And if this statement is false, then I fall through to here and I just return false. And that should be everything I need for modifying this to read inputs from a file. Let me just compile it. That was successful. So we can see the Donchian inputs here. Currently Donchian bars 10, high label, high and low. So that's the same as the default values. Let me rearrange the screen a little. All right, I've rearranged the screen. I have the Donchian inputs.ini file here on the left. I've removed the indicator from the screen. Let me load it up again. Still has the default Donchian bars of 10, and now I have the file name here. So this has created the Donchian channel that we saw before with a Donchian value of 10. If I now modify this value to 5 and save the file, then at the next tick it recalculates the Donchian channel. I also have the data window here. Let me just make that a little larger, and you can see the values here are high and low. If I change this and save, then you can see that this label changed. So it's reading those strings as well. So it's reading these strings and it's reading that. Let me just make that something bigger. And you can see it's reflecting that. But do remember, these values are in the file. If I restart this indicator, in fact, if I just go now to the indicator list, it still shows number of Donchian bars as 10, but clearly it's not processing 10 now. So that's just that thing you need to be aware of if you're going to take this kind of approach. And the same thing applies for indicators and experts. The inputs will still remember whatever you set the inputs as, even if you are using a different value. Hope this has been useful to you. Remember to click the like button, and if you want to see more of our videos, click subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified when we release our next video. Thank you for watching.